What is up, guys? Today we're going to be checking out 5 Motorola budget smartphones. So these phones should be around 200 to 50. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the first phone for 250 is the Moto G A Power. This is an excellent phone. If you want to watch the full review, I do have reviews on most of these phones on the channel. But yeah, awesome phone. Pretty good build quality, even though it's a plastic design. It still has a really nice weight to it because of the huge 5,000 milliamp battery inside of it, so it does not feel super cheap. It is water repellent, but I would not like submerge it in water or anything like that. For the display, it is an IPS display. It's a 6.4-inch IPS display, 1080p, 399 for the PPI. It has a little punch hole on the left hand side, and it's a beautiful display. Very nice display, good viewing angles. Like I said, the pixel density is actually pretty high for this price point, and it's just overall a great display. It gets bright outdoors as well too, and I love that it has the punch hole because it makes everything much more immersive when you're watching videos and gaming and stuff like that. Another great thing is that this phone comes out of the box with Android 10, and it's very smooth. It's pretty much stock Android with a few Motorola customizations in the Moto app. So you do have your dark mode, one-handed mode, gestures, all of that stuff on here. So you have the Snapdragon 665 and the Adreno 610, and gaming on here was actually pretty decent. Obviously you're not going to be going super hard and high settings on Fortnite or anything like that, but playing games like Call of Duty Mobile, PUBG is going to be perfectly fine for the casual gamer. So you do have micro SD support, as well as 64 gigs of internal storage and 4 gigs of RAM. So this phone is pretty snappy overall. RAM management speed is fine on here for this price point. So you do have stereo speakers, which I actually love at this price point. I wish all phones did this. It has a little front-facing speaker, even though it's a tiny one, still better than nothing. And this phone gets pretty loud, and the audio quality is actually pretty good as well. This phone does lack NFC, so if you're into the mobile payment, you will not have that here. You have the fingerprint scanner on the back, and it works very fine for a physical fingerprint scanner. Now the camera setup is actually pretty good. It's definitely a step in the right direction from previous budget Motorola phones. A 16 megapixel wide, 8 megapixel telephoto, an 8 megapixel ultra wide, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. You do have 4K video recording and a 16 megapixel selfie camera. So overall, as you can see from these shots, taking pictures and stuff like that is going to be perfectly fine on this phone. I found color was decent, dynamic range was decent, details were decent. So overall, and good lighting, you can get a great shot. Now what you're really buying this phone for is the 5,000 milliamp battery with 18-watt fast charging. So this phone is very hard to kill, especially if you're a light user. So if you're not a hardcore gamer, you can easily get 2 days of battery life out of this phone easy. So definitely an excellent phone for battery life. You should get around 9 hours of screen on time. Again, it varies if you're a light user or not, but an excellent phone. Next is the Moto G A Plus. So you can find this phone for around 200 to 180. I've seen it on Amazon. Again, those links will be down below. And yeah, so this is very similar, but it has some small little differences as well. So you do have the pretty much the same design, a plastic design, water repellent. On here you have the IPS display. It's a 6.3-inch 1080p, 400 for the PPI. Again, a very nice display. This one has a little water drop notch instead of the punch hole, which is fine. It's not a big deal for most people. Viewing angles and brightness is definitely pretty good, so no real issues with the display here. So you do have Android 9, and this will get Android 10, but you get the Snapdragon 665 and the Adreno 610. So just like with the GA Power, you're going to be getting similar performance. So you're not going to be going crazy, but you will be able to play games perfectly fine from what I'm seeing. So you do have micro SD support, 64 gigs of storage and 4 gigs of RAM. So multitasking and just bouncing in and out of applications is perfectly fine on this phone. Now you do have a triple camera setup, so it's a 48 megapixel wide, a 16 megapixel ultra wide, and a 5 megapixel depth sensor. So it's missing the macro camera. You do have the 4K video as well as the 25 megapixel selfie camera, and the photos on here again are good, pretty much similar to the G8 Power actually. Now you do have stereo speakers on here, which are, definitely loud enough. And this phone actually has NFC, so if you're into the mobile payment, you have that on here. Physical fingerprint scanner, very fast. Now, where this differs from the G8 Power is the 4,000 milliamp battery. Obviously, it's smaller than the 5,000 milliamp battery. You have 15-watt fast charging, so you can still get really good battery life out of here. Definitely a day and a half for light users. So no real issues with this phone, just slightly cheaper. So I really like this one as well. Next is the Moto G7 Play. So this is just an awesome phone that I really loved when I first got it, and they upgraded it to Android 10. It's the reason why it even made the list. Plus, it's extremely cheap. You can find it for around $120 to even $100 if you watch for the price fluctuations. So pretty much a plastic design, IPS display. It's a 5.7-inch display. So if you want a smaller compact phone, you could look at this one. 720p display, 294/50 ppi. A screen is perfectly fine. It's an IPS display. Colors are decent. You do have kind of a big notch up top, so if that doesn't bother you, you should be fine. This is upgradable to Android 10, like I said, which is crazy because performance on here was actually pretty good. So I think just with the stock Android on these Motorola phones, you get really good performance. Snapdragon 632 processor along with the Adreno 506, so you will be playing games at like medium settings to low settings. So for the casual gamer, Temple Run, Subway Surfer, whatever, you'll be able to play just fine. You do have expandable storage along with 32 gigs of internal storage and 2 gigs of RAM. But like I said, even with that low RAM, this phone is still relatively smooth. So I've done a review and then a 6-month review, so you can check that out. So you do have a 13 megapixel main camera, a 4K camera. It is an 8 megapixel selfie camera up front that shoots in 1080p. The cameras are decent. You got to be in some good lighting if you want to get a pretty decent photo. If you're in anything else, then you kind of get like a grainy, non-color accurate photo. But you have a 3.5 millimeter jack on here as well. This phone does not have NFC. Fingerprint scanner is on the back, very fast. You also have a 3,000 milliamp battery with 10-watt charging, and the battery life is fine. You can definitely get a day, no problem on this guy. Next is the Moto GA Power Lite. So this is a very interesting phone coming in at around 180, and it's basically the light version of the G8 Power. And you pretty much have a plastic design, a water repellent coating on here, and overall it looks pretty good. You have the water drop notch up front with a 6.5-inch display, so a pretty nice size display. It's a 720p display, 269 for the PPI. It comes with Android 9, but you should be able to get Android 10 in the near future. Now you have a weaker Helio P35 processor, which again is going to be like the low mid-end gaming. So again, you're not going to be going crazy with these phones when it comes to gaming, but you have micro SD support and 64 gigs of storage and actually 4 gigs of RAM, which is pretty good. So the phone, from what I've seen, is relatively smooth. So you do have the headphone jack on here as well, and you also have the fingerprint scanner on the back, which seems pretty fast as well. And you have a triple camera setup. It's a 16 megapixel wide, 2 megapixel macro, and a 2 megapixel depth sensor. Shoots in 1080p, and an 8 megapixel selfie camera. Again, if you're in some good lighting, you should be able to get a pretty good photo, but you're really buying this phone for the battery life. You have the same 5,000 milliamp battery in this phone, so you're going to get excellent battery life. And with this 720p display, you could easily get 2.5 days, if not 3 days of battery life with this phone. So that's the main reason you would pick this up. Next is the Moto G8 Play. So this was kind of an awkward one. I kind of love and hated this phone, but when it first came out, it was much more expensive at $200. Now the prices came way down to $130, which I think is the right price for this guy. So you have a plastic design very similar to the rest of the phones that we've seen on this list. It's a 6.2-inch display, 720p, 271 for the PPI, Android 9 out of the box, Helio P70 with the Mali G72. Now it's actually a decent processor, so This phone was relatively smooth. The only thing I did not like was that it had only 2 gigs of RAM, which was just a little too low for me. So for multitasking, you basically can't do a whole bunch of multitasking with this guy at all. But I just couldn't complain about the speed because the phone rarely lagged. So you do have 32 gigs of internal storage, and the cameras on here were decent. You have a triple camera setup, 13 megapixel wide, 8 megapixel ultra wide, 2 megapixel depth sensor. Nothing really special. You can get a decent photo again if you're in good lighting. You also have an 8 megapixel selfie camera, the headphone jack, no NFC with this guy, fingerprint scanner on the back, with a 4000 milliamp battery, which again is going to get you around a day and a half of battery life, no problem. So really nice size battery. Again, I would buy this phone as a backup phone or something like that. So thanks for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one.